I would say we don't know what will move the needle yet because we're in the middle of a complex negotiation process that doesn't lend itself necessarily to social media hot takes, whether it's by our own political leaders or quick comments and nightly addresses by Ukraine. Historically, negotiations take time and they take discretion. And so you're seeing a real tension play out, and each side is using a mix of private communication, direct private messages through intermediaries and also directly, as well as these public claims to try to gain a position of leverage. And so I think we're starting to see now that actually behind the scenes, Trump's team has been putting pressure on Moscow. I know sometimes from the outside it doesn't look like that, but this is the first sign that there has been pressure put on Moscow to accept some type of concession. So it's the mix of carrots and sticks that are really going to matter, and you can't have all the carrots and sticks publicly revealed or people start to maneuver around them. So does it move the needle? Maybe, but I think more importantly, what it reminds us of is that not everything is as it appears from the outside.
Yeah, isn't that always the case? Well, Vladimir Putin certainly isn't waiting around. As you heard me mention, the attacks on Kyiv, missiles and drones were horrifying. The images are horrifying, and I'm guessing that President Trump saw them in his daily briefing today. He took to Truth Social, pretty quick post, at least for Donald Trump. It says, "I am not happy with the Russian strikes on Kyiv." If you're with us on YouTube, you see the post. "Not necessary and very bad timing," he writes. "Vladimir, stop!" Exclamation point. 5,000 soldiers a week are dying. Let's get the peace deal done! Exclamation point. Pretty interesting. Vladimir, stop. Ben, will he?
No. In fact, I would direct you and your viewers and listeners to check out our firepower strike tracker at CSIS. So for over a year now, we've actually been scraping statistics to analyze how Russia uses a mix of long-range drones, the Shahed, as well as ballistic missiles and cruise missiles to effectively negotiate by fire, to use a punishment strategy as a way of gaining strategic leverage over President Zelenskyy through trying to kill as many Ukrainian civilians as possible. This is completely counterintuitive to most of the ways we've talked about war in the 21st century, but it shows us that war remains not only a continuation of politics, but ultimately tragic and brutal. And so what Putin did is not necessarily any different than what he's done. What you're seeing is that Ukraine is at a critical point because Russia is actually getting more sophisticated in its targeting, better able to integrate satellite intelligence, better to integrate cyber intelligence, and now increasingly being able to direct a complex mix of ballistic cruise missiles and then more sophisticated Shaheds that resist Ukrainian electronic warfare. And if you check out that firepower strike tracker, we detail with all the statistics. We actually break down and do the analysis to show that when you mix the different types of attacks and you concentrate them in a geographic space, so I mix ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones just on the capital, it's going to lower the probability that Ukraine can intercept them. And it's going to actually begin to really wage this punishment strategy into a brutal war of attrition, which we've already seen. So it might have seemed like it was audacious, it was bad timing, but this is central to Russia's strategy. They can't win on the battlefield. They're throwing their own young men, literally what the Ukrainians call them as meat assaults, at front lines where they're killed by drones. And so their bid for success when they can't win with this 21st century version of trench warfare is to try to bomb the Ukrainians into submission. It's utterly brutal, and our president is right to take the stance he did.
This is incredible, Ben. Terrifying as you describe this. I'm looking right now. You check this out, guys. Go Google it. As Ben mentioned here, Russian firepower strike tracker, analyzing missile attacks in Ukraine. This is great work from the Futures Lab at CSIS. Ben, that would suggest that the closer we get to peace, the more violent this conflict will be.
I think you're absolutely right. And in fact, that's something for, your viewers and listeners to really take into consideration. There is a tendency now moving from the political and strategic level down to the operational for each side to take more risk and gambles to seek territorial concessions or some kind of additional. Basically, everyone's competing to get new chips before they head to the poker table called these negotiations. So I think you're not just going to see Russia increase these kind of highly concentrated firepower strikes. strikes. You're going to see them continue to sacrifice the lives of future Russian generations. You are also going to see them beg, borrow, and steal from North Korea, China, and Iran to build up their arsenal of authoritarianism. But at the same time, on the other side, you're also probably going to see the Ukrainians pull off some pretty daring raids and long-range strikes. And the Ukrainians have been utterly ingenious throughout this war. Remember, this is a country that entered the conflict with 5 drone companies and now has over 500. And they produce thousands of FPVs, first-person view drones, all the way up to long-range, low-cost cruise missiles daily. So you're, I think, going to see not just Russia increasingly try to punish the Ukrainian people. I would expect to see more long-range Ukrainian raids. So in the last week alone, you've had a Ukrainian strike on Russian strategic bomber bases and also a Ukrainian long-range strike on a major ammunition depot. So I think we're going to also see the Ukrainians trying to get those poker chips for the negotiation table as well.
Wow. All right, Ben, I want to ask you about Crimea specifically, and I want to bring you back to this post that Donald Trump made yesterday on Truth Social. I'm sure you saw it. Ukrainian President Zelenskyy, he writes, is boasting on the front page of the Wall Street Journal that Ukraine will not legally recognize the occupation of Crimea. Donald Trump goes on to write, this statement is very harmful to the peace negotiations with Russia in that Crimea was lost years ago under the auspices of President Barack Hussein Obama and is not even a point of discussion. He goes on to say that if he wants Crimea, why didn't they fight for it 11 years ago when it was handed over to Russia without a shot being fired? That's a bit of revisionist history if you were paying attention to things then. The press secretary at the White House, Caroline Leavitt, picked it up from there in the White House driveway yesterday. Ben, here's what she said.
Well, as President Trump rightfully pointed out in that statement, it was President Obama who gave up Crimea, who allowed Russia to take it over in 2014. And so the president is not asking Ukraine to recognize Crimea. Nobody has asked them to do that. What he is asking is for people to come to the negotiating table recognizing that this has been a brutal war for far too long. And in order to make a good deal, both sides have to walk away a little bit unhappy.
Ben, you don't have to wade into the Obama stuff, but aren't we asking Ukraine to acknowledge Crimea as Russian territory? And what would happen to those Russian sub bases if, in fact, Crimea went back to Kyiv?
So I think what you're seeing in all of this, if rhetoric and reality have not aligned for some time in American politics. So I think the president's trying to make the point that he wants them to negotiate. The challenge, and this is where the details matter, is if you look at Article 2 of the Ukrainian Constitution, and we're Americans, so constitutions matter to us. Our own constitution matters. And we know that other countries also guarantee rights to their citizen, natural rights, through structures like constitutions. Article 2 of the Ukrainian Constitution makes it impossible for President Zelenskyy to recognize Crimea as part of Russia. And the Ukrainians, frankly, did fight for it. They fought for a long time. It's just that Russia, through a manipulation of the law of armed conflict, used the little green men to seize it. And frankly, there were a lot of Russian pensioners in Crimea and large Russian naval bases making it easier. So what you have right now is a very interesting situation where the president is just doing what he does. He really likes to turn up the rhetoric. He likes to say things that grab our attention, and he's frankly successful at it, and pull us in a way that he can try to pressure both Ukraine and Russia to try to negotiate to achieve this objective, which in a larger strategic sense means that the United States can focus on the ongoing Iran negotiations and also focus more on China. But in the meantime, what's happening is it's unsettling some of the larger complexities of any peace deal. So Crimea is going to be hard for the Ukrainians to win back militarily, and it's definitely going to be something the Russians will resist giving at the negotiation table, owing exactly to what you put out. Crimea is key maritime terrain. And not only is it key maritime terrain, Russia actually still maintains large space infrastructure there for communicating with its satellite constellation. So Crimea is important both from a maritime and a space standpoint, but also increasingly a symbolic standpoint. So it's hard to see that Russia's really going to be willing to negotiate with it. And it's hard to imagine, short of a catastrophic collapse of the Russian military along the front line, that Ukraine can take it by military force, which means we're left with a very difficult reality. Ukraine cannot cede Crimea until it adjusts its own constitution. It can't do constitutional referendums under martial law in the middle of the war. So there's really a coordination challenge involved with these negotiations about what has to move first. Can you have elections in Ukraine? Can you put those things up? And it also is a reminder to us that no matter what we hear on Truth Social or what Zelensky says in a nightly address, this process is going to take months, if not years, to play out. And the details are what will matter. The technical details are what drives negotiations in the end.